My name is Olivia Bennett, and until 6 months ago, no one in my family knew what I really did for a living. I've always been the dependable one, first to arrive at family gatherings, last to leave after cleaning up, the daughter who calls our parents twice a week just to check in, the sister who remembers everyone's birthdays, anniversaries, and favorite desserts. I'm 34, single, and as far as my family was concerned, just another mid-level executive at a financial firm in Manhattan, barely making enough to afford my modest one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. At least, that's what they thought. The truth? I'm the founder and CEO of Avalon Partners, one of the fastest-growing private equity firms in the country. Last year, we closed a $6.3 billion acquisition of Meridian Technologies, the largest deal in our industry's history. I own 47% of Avalon's shares, worth approximately $85 million, and no one in my family had a clue. It wasn't always like this. I started out sharing my small victories with them, my first major client, my first $1 million deal, but their reactions were always the same: disbelief followed by dismissal. "That can't be right," my mother would say, furrowing her brow. "Those numbers don't make sense." "Who would trust you with that kind of money?" my sister Vanessa would laugh. "You can barely balance your checkbook." The thing is, I've always been excellent with numbers. I graduated summa cum laude from Wharton. I was recruited by Goldman Sachs before I even finished my MBA. But in my family's eyes, I was still the awkward, dreamy kid who needed help with everything. So I stopped sharing. I let them believe what they wanted. I drove an 8-year-old Honda Civic to family gatherings. I wore simple clothes from department stores. I complained about my boss and fabricated stories about office politics. I became the person they expected me to be. And for years, it worked. They stopped questioning my career and started pitying me instead. Poor Olivia, always working so hard for so little reward. Maybe someday she'll find a husband who can take care of her. It might have continued that way indefinitely if not for what happened at Vanessa's wedding. It was a perfect June evening at the Bellevue Hotel, the kind of high-end venue my sister had always dreamed about. Crystal chandeliers reflected off marble floors. White roses and orchids adorned every table. The guest list included 250 of Philadelphia's most influential families. My sister had always been good at making the right connections. Her new husband, Alexander Whitfield, came from old money, banking, real estate, a bit of oil back in the day. He had the polished charm of someone who'd never worried about paying bills. Vanessa had met him at a charity gala 3 years ago and had been strategically positioning herself in his orbit ever since. I was happy for her, truly. She'd always been clear about what she wanted in life, and now she had it. But I couldn't help noticing how her attitude toward me had worsened since she'd gotten engaged. The pitying glances had turned to something closer to contempt. During the rehearsal dinner, she'd seated me at the far corner table with distant relatives no one really knew. When I arrived at the bridal suite to help her get ready, she asked if I could instead go check on the catering. She already had her successful friends helping with her dress and makeup. I'd brushed it off. This was her day, after all. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I was standing alone near the bar, nursing a glass of champagne, when I overheard my name. Curious, I moved closer to a cluster of guests partially hidden by a large floral arrangement. "That's her, the sister," Vanessa was saying to Alexander's mother and 2 women I didn't recognize. "Olivia's always been the family charity case." My hand froze mid-sip. "She works as some kind of assistant at a bank," Vanessa continued, "always talking about how she's going to move up, but she's been in the same position for years." "That's a shame," one of the women murmured. "I know. I offered to have Alexander find her something better, but she's too proud. Or maybe just not qualified." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "I've accepted that she's just going to be one of those people who never really makes anything of themselves." Alexander's mother nodded sympathetically. "Family can be such a burden sometimes. The worst part is, she's always putting on airs." Vanessa lowered her voice. "She carries around this black credit card like she's some big shot, claims it's some elite membership thing, but I'm sure it's just from her company. Probably has a $500 limit." They all laughed, and I felt my face burn. The Black Avalon card. It was a custom card I'd created for myself and my 7 top executives. No limit. Exclusive perks. And yes, it was made of black titanium with a subtle iridescent finish. It wasn't for show. It was simply convenient for business expenses and large personal purchases. I rarely even used it around family. I had to invite her, of course, Vanessa continued, but Alexander and I made sure to seat her far from the important guests. Wouldn't want her embarrassing us by talking about her pathetic studio apartment or trying to network with his colleagues. I didn't have a studio apartment. I owned a penthouse in Tribeca and a beach house in the Hamptons, but they didn't know that, because I'd never invited them over. I'd always met them at restaurants or our parents' house. I should have walked away. Should have ignored it like I'd ignored every other dismissive comment over the years. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was hearing my sister describe me as an embarrassment on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life. Maybe it was the realization that no matter what I did, she would never see me as anything but a failure. Or maybe I was just tired of hiding. I straightened my shoulders, tucked my clutch under my arm, and stepped around the floral arrangement. "Excuse me," I said pleasantly. 4 heads whipped toward me. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Olivia, we were just discussing my disappointing career and financial situation." I finished for her. "Yes, I heard." An uncomfortable silence fell. Alexander's mother cleared her throat and muttered something about checking on the dinner arrangements. The other 2 women suddenly found the appetizer table fascinating. Vanessa recovered quickly, a tight smile forming on her lips. "Don't be so sensitive. I was just explaining to Mrs. Whitfield why you couldn't contribute more to the wedding. Everyone understands." I had given them a check for $10,000 as a wedding gift, which Vanessa had accepted with a perfunctory thanks and a comment about how it must have been such a stretch for me. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "And my black card? The one with the $500 limit?" "Oh, come on," she rolled her eyes. "We all know that's just for show. You're not fooling anyone." I should have let it go. It was her wedding day. But her words had cut deep, and for once, I wanted her to know the truth. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my card, holding it between 2 fingers. "This card has no limit. Vanessa, it's the Black Avalon card, custom made for the executives of Avalon Partners." She squinted at it. "Avalon? Never heard of it. Sounds like one of those predatory credit card companies." "It's not a credit card company. It's my company." I kept my voice low, aware of the guests mingling nearby. "I'm the founder and CEO." She stared at me for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Avalon Partners. Look it up." I slid the card back into my clutch. "We closed the Meridian Technologies acquisition last month. It was in the Wall Street Journal." Her smile faltered. "Stop it, Olivia. This isn't funny." "No, it's not. It's actually quite serious. I've been letting you believe I'm struggling financially because it seemed to make you happy. But I'm done being your family's charity case." Vanessa's eyes darted around, checking if anyone was listening. "You're making a scene," she hissed. "This is my wedding day." "Yes, it is," I agreed. "And I wouldn't dream of ruining it. So I'll make you a deal. Stop talking about me to your new in-laws, and I won't mention that my wedding gift could have paid for this entire reception." Her face flushed red. "You're lying. You've always been jealous of me." "I'm not jealous, Vanessa. I'm just tired." I picked up my champagne glass from a nearby table. "Enjoy your wedding. The floral arrangements are beautiful." I walked away, heart pounding. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I'd sometimes imagined having with my family. It wasn't even particularly satisfying, but it was a start. As I headed toward the exit, needing some air, I felt a hand on my arm. It was my mother. "Olivia, where are you going? They're about to serve dinner." I looked at her. This woman who had always treated me like I was still 12 years old, who'd never believed in my potential. "I need some fresh air. I'll be back soon." Her eyes narrowed with concern. "Are you feeling ill? You look flushed." "I'm fine, Mom. Just had an interesting conversation with Vanessa." Oh? Her expression turned wary. What about? I hesitated. This wasn't the time or place for revelations. Just wedding stuff, nothing important. She seemed relieved. Well, hurry back. Your father saved you a seat at our table since you're not in the bridal party. Not in the bridal party? My own sister hadn't asked me to be a bridesmaid, let alone maid of honor. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that Vanessa had many close friends who deserved those spots, but the truth was, it had hurt. I'll be there soon, I promised. Outside on the terrace, I took deep breaths of the warm summer air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In the distance, the Philadelphia skyline glittered. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out to find a text from James, my COO. Bloomberg wants a statement on the Westlake negotiation. Call when you can. The Westlake deal? Another acquisition in the works, potentially even bigger than Meridian. My real life was calling. I dialed James's number. Sorry to bother you at the wedding, he said when he picked up, but they're pressing for details, and the stock is already responding to rumors. It's fine, I replied, leaning against the stone balustrade. Tell them we have no comment at this time, but we'll issue a statement Monday morning. And James, make sure legal reviews it first. I don't want any issues with the SEC. Will do. How's the wedding? I glanced back at the glittering ballroom through the French doors. Enlightening. Did you finally tell them? James was one of the few people who knew about my family situation. He'd never understood why I kept up the charade, but he'd respected my decision. Not exactly, but things might change soon. After ending the call, I stood there for a few more minutes, gathering my thoughts. Then I straightened my dress, a simple blue silk sheath that had cost more than Vanessa's first car, and walked back inside. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of strained smiles and polite conversation. Vanessa avoided me, which was fine. I made small talk with relatives, danced with a couple of my cousins, and left as soon as it was socially acceptable. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, not the Honda Civic, which was parked at my parents' house, but the Aston Martin I'd driven in from New York, I felt a strange sense of lightness. A small crack had formed in the wall of deception I'd built, and rather than being frightening, it felt like the first breath of fresh air after being underwater too long. Maybe it was time to finally show my family who I really was. The fallout from the wedding was both more and less than I expected. Vanessa didn't call or text, which wasn't surprising. My mother phoned the next day to ask if I'd gotten home safely, but didn't mention any wedding drama, which meant my sister hadn't said anything about our conversation. My father sent his usual Sunday text. Hope you're doing well, sweetheart. Life returned to normal, or what had passed for normal in our family for years. Surface-level pleasantries with no real substance. I threw myself back into work. The Westlake negotiation was at a critical stage, and I spent most of my waking hours in conference rooms and on calls. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The wedding incident began to feel like a distant dream. Then came the annual Bennett family reunion. It was a tradition started by my grandparents decades ago. 3 days at my Uncle William's lake house in the Poconos, with aunts, uncles, cousins, and various family adjacents all crammed together for fishing, barbecues, and inevitable drama. I usually found an excuse to leave early, citing work emergencies. This year, I was tempted to skip it entirely, but something, curiosity, perhaps, or a lingering sense of unfinished business, made me pack my bags and make the drive from New York. I arrived late Friday afternoon to find the usual chaos. Children running across the lawn, my uncle arguing with my cousin about the proper way to grill corn, my Aunt Martha passing around her famous spinach dip that everyone pretended to love. My parents greeted me with distracted hugs, already deep in conversation with relatives. Vanessa and Alexander were there, holding court on the deck with matching looks of superior amusement, as if the family's simple pleasures were charming in their quaintness. Olivia! My cousin Emma rushed over to embrace me. Emma had always been my favorite relative, honest, kind, and genuinely interested in others. I was hoping you'd make it this year. Wouldn't miss it, I lied, returning her hug. How's work? Still putting up with that terrible boss? I hesitated. The fictional boss I'd invented years ago had featured in many of my family stories, an amalgamation of every bad manager stereotype, demanding and clueless in equal measure. Actually, there have been some changes, I said carefully. Emma raised an eyebrow. Good ones, I hope? Very good, but it's a long story. Well, I want to hear all about it, but first, help me set up the volleyball net? No one else can figure out those stupid poles. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough. I avoided Vanessa, made small talk with various relatives, and found myself relaxing despite my earlier misgivings. Family reunions had a way of reverting everyone to familiar patterns, and I slipped easily into my role as helpful, unassuming Olivia. Until dinner. We were all gathered around the massive picnic tables on the lawn, plates loaded with burgers, pasta salad, and my Aunt Joan's legendary mac and cheese. The conversation flowed from topic to topic: my cousin's new baby, my uncle's retirement plans, local politics. Then my father cleared his throat and raised his beer bottle. I'd like to propose a toast, he announced, to all of us being together again, and especially to Vanessa and Alexander, celebrating their first family reunion as a married couple. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses. Vanessa beamed, leaning into her husband with practiced affection. And my father continued, to their exciting news, they've just put a deposit down on a beautiful house in Bryn Mawr. 5 bedrooms, a pool, the works. More cheers and congratulations. I smiled and nodded along with everyone else. We're so proud of how well Vanessa's doing, my mother added, her voice carrying across the tables. Her interior design business is really taking off, and Alexander's just made partner at his law firm. Mostly Alexander's doing, Vanessa said modestly, though her expression was anything but. The house is a bit of a stretch financially, but you have to invest in your future, right? Several relatives nodded sagely. Not all of us can afford to take those kinds of risks, my Aunt Patricia commented, glancing at me. Some people have to be more practical. I felt a familiar sinking feeling. Here it came. Speaking of which, my mother said, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Olivia, how's that apartment hunting going? Have you found a better place yet? I hadn't mentioned apartment hunting to her. It was yet another fiction, that I was looking to upgrade from my studio to a 1-bedroom. Actually, I'm not looking anymore, I said. Oh, she frowned. Is the rent too high? You know, your father and I could help out a little if you need it. Across the table, Vanessa smirked into her wineglass. I don't need help with rent, I said carefully. Well, there's no shame in needing a little assistance, my father interjected. Times are tough for everyone. Not for Olivia, Vanessa suddenly chimed in, her voice laced with mockery. Didn't you know? She's actually a big-shot CEO with her own company, makes millions every year. A shocked silence fell over the table. All eyes turned to me. Vanessa, Alexander murmured, looking uncomfortable. She ignored him. Tell them, Olivia, tell them about your fancy black credit card and your big important company that no one's ever heard of. I met her gaze steadily. Avalon Partners. We're a private equity firm. My mother's forehead creased in confusion. What are you two talking about? Olivia's been lying to us, Vanessa announced, her voice rising. At my wedding, she tried to convince me she's some hotshot businesswoman, as if anyone would believe that. I never said I was a hotshot anything, I replied, keeping my voice even. I simply corrected your assumption about my card. What card? My father asked. Her mysterious black credit card, Vanessa rolled her eyes. The one she flashes around trying to look important. I don't flash anything, I said. And it's not a credit card. It's a charge card for Avalon executives. Avalon Partners is a real company, Emma interjected suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She held up her phone. I just Googled it. They're actually a pretty big deal. They acquired Meridian Technologies earlier this year. That was a huge story in the business world. Let me see that. My Uncle William reached for Emma's phone, squinting at the screen. Huh. Founded by Olivia Bennett. He looked up at me, eyes wide. That's you? All attention swung back to me. I took a deep breath. Yes, I founded Avalon 7 years ago. We currently manage about $18 billion in assets. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, my mother finally said. You work at First National Bank. You've told us about your boss, your coworkers. I made that up, I admitted. I got tired of trying to explain what I really do because no one ever believed me. Because it's not believable, Vanessa burst out. You expect us to think you've been secretly running some billion-dollar company all this time? Why would you hide that? Why would she make it up? Emma countered. Google exists. Vanessa, this is verifiable information. My Aunt Patricia grabbed Emma's phone next. My God, it's true. There are photos of you at economic forums, giving speeches. She looked up at me, bewildered. Why didn't you tell us? I looked around the table at my family's shocked faces and felt a strange calm settle over me. I did tell you, in the beginning, but you all decided it couldn't possibly be true. Mom, when I told you I was starting my own firm, you said it was a nice fantasy and asked when I was going to get a real job. Dad, when I mentioned my first major deal, you changed the subject to Cousin Jack's promotion at the insurance company. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. We were just worried about you, my mother said defensively. Starting businesses is risky. And after a while, it just seemed easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe. I shrugged. You were all so comfortable with the idea of me struggling, always needing help, never quite measuring up. It became clear that my success made you uncomfortable. That's ridiculous, my father protested. We've always wanted you to succeed. Just not more than Vanessa, I said quietly. Another uncomfortable silence. This is absurd, Vanessa finally said. She's making all this up for attention. Alexander cleared his throat. Actually, darling, I think she might be telling the truth. Avalon Partners is quite well known in financial circles. My firm has worked with some of their portfolio companies. Vanessa's head whipped toward him. What? Why didn't you say something? I didn't make the connection. I've never met Olivia Bennett, the CEO. Only your sister. He looked at me with new interest. Although now that I'm looking more closely, there is a resemblance to the photos I've seen. This doesn't make any sense, my mother insisted. If you're so successful, why do you drive that old Honda? Why do you live in a tiny apartment? Why don't you ever talk about your work? I don't live in a tiny apartment. I have a penthouse in Tribeca and a house in the Hamptons. The Honda is just what I drive when I visit you because it's what you expect. And I don't talk about work because whenever I tried, you either didn't believe me or changed the subject. My Uncle William was still scrolling through search results on Emma's phone. Says here you were named one of the 40 under 40 business leaders by Fortune magazine last year. Oh my God, Vanessa whispered, her face pale. I stood up, suddenly tired of the whole conversation. Look, I didn't come here to cause drama or prove anything. I've been content letting you all believe whatever made you comfortable. But I'm done pretending to be less than I am. Olivia, wait, my father began, but I was already walking away from the table. I headed down to the dock, needing some space. The sun was setting over the lake, turning the water into a sheet of molten gold. I sat on the edge, feet dangling above the gentle waves, and tried to process what had just happened. It wasn't how I'd imagined this revelation going. In my fantasies, there had been more dignity, more control, but maybe ripping off the Band-Aid was better. I heard footsteps on the dock behind me. Turning, I expected to see Emma or perhaps one of my parents. Instead, it was my grandmother. Grandma Rose had been quietly observing the dinner drama from the end of the table. At 85, she rarely inserted herself into family conflicts, preferring to watch with the detached amusement of someone who had seen it all before. Mind if I join you? She asked, already lowering herself carefully beside me. Of course not. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the sunset. You know, she finally said, your grandfather and I always knew you'd do something extraordinary. I turned to her in surprise. You did? She nodded. You were different from the other children, always watching, analyzing. When you were 10, you set up that lemonade stand and ended up franchising it to 3 other kids on the block. I smiled at the memory. You remember that? Of course. You charged them for cups and lemons, but let them keep 70% of the profits. Very generous split. It incentivized hard work, I said with a shrug. She chuckled. See? That kind of thinking, not many children have it. Her expression grew more serious. I suspected you were downplaying your success. Not to this extent, mind you, but I knew something wasn't adding up. Why didn't you say anything? It wasn't my place. You clearly had your reasons. She patted my hand. Though I am curious why you kept up the charade for so long. I sighed, trying to organize thoughts I'd never fully articulated even to myself. At first, it was just easier. No one believed me anyway. Then it became, I don't know, a kind of experiment. I wanted to see if anyone would notice the inconsistencies, if anyone actually paid enough attention to me to realize something didn't add up. And no one did? Emma might have suspected. She asks better questions than most. I traced patterns in the weathered wood of the dock. But mostly, I think it was about keeping the peace. My success threatened the family hierarchy. Grandma Rose nodded thoughtfully. Families develop their own mythology about each member. You were cast as the dreamer, the one who needed looking after. Vanessa was the practical achiever. Your parents invested heavily in those narratives. Exactly. And it was easier to maintain the status quo than disrupt everyone's comfortable worldview. Even at the cost of being truly known by your family? The question hit harder than I expected. I guess I didn't think that was possible. She was quiet for a moment. You know, your grandfather was the same way. Brilliant man. But his brothers could never acknowledge it. They were so threatened by his intelligence that they made him the family joke, the one with his head in the clouds. This was news to me. Grandpa Bennett? But everyone respected him. Eventually, yes, but only after he stopped hiding his light. She smiled at my surprised expression. Oh yes, he went through a phase very much like yours. Downplayed his achievements. Let his brothers think he was struggling when his business was actually thriving. What changed? I did, she said simply. I refused to marry a man who wouldn't stand in his full power. Told him either he showed his family who he really was, or I would walk away. That was a risky ultimatum. The right things usually are. She squeezed my hand. He was terrified. Thought they would reject him if they knew how successful he'd become. Instead, it transformed their relationship. Not overnight. Mind you, there was plenty of hurt and adjustment, but ultimately, it allowed for something authentic to grow. We sat with that for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. So what now? I finally asked. That's entirely up to you, dear. But if I may offer some advice? She waited for my nod before continuing. Don't let your resentment steal this opportunity. Yes, your family failed to see you clearly. Yes, that hurt. But now you have the chance to build something real with them, if you want it. And if I don't? The question came out softer than I intended. Then that's valid too, but make that choice consciously, not as a reaction. She began the careful process of standing up, waving away my offered hand. I may be old, but I'm not decrepit yet. Once upright, she straightened her cardigan with dignity. They're all still up at the house, talking about you. Quite the uproar you've caused. I didn't mean to ruin the reunion. Psh, this is the most interesting family reunion we've had in decades. Her eyes twinkled. Much better than last year, when your cousin Jim got drunk and fell in the lake. I laughed despite myself. Take your time down here, she said. Gather your thoughts. Then come up when you're ready, or don't. You're a grown woman with a car and, apparently, significant resources. You have choices. She started back along the dock, then paused. Oh, and Olivia? I'm proud of you. Not because you're rich or successful, though that's quite impressive. I'm proud because you remained kind despite being underestimated. That takes a special kind of strength. With that, she continued up the path to the house, leaving me with tears in my eyes and a lot to think about. I stayed by the lake until the stars were fully out. Reflecting on Grandma Rose's words and considering my options, I could get in my car and drive back to New York, leaving my family to process this revelation without me. I could return to the house and answer their inevitable questions with minimal detail, maintaining emotional distance, or I could be fully honest, not just about my career, but about how their dismissal had affected me. In the end, I chose the hardest path. I walked back to the house. The scene that greeted me was both comical and uncomfortable. The entire extended family was gathered in the living room in what appeared to be an impromptu meeting. My father was standing by the fireplace, gesturing emphatically. My mother sat rigidly on the sofa, clutching a glass of wine. Vanessa was pacing near the window, while Alexander appeared to be showing something on his phone to my uncles. All conversation stopped when I entered. "Olivia," my father said, an odd formality in his voice. "We were just discussing, well, you—" I gathered that. Emma patted the space beside her on the window seat. I crossed the room and sat down, feeling multiple pairs of eyes tracking my movement. "So—" My Uncle William broke the silence. "CEO, huh?" A nervous laugh rippled through the room. "Yes." "And the Meridian Technologies acquisition, that was really you?" my cousin Jack asked. He worked in corporate insurance and had always treated me with the tolerant amusement one might show a child. "My team and I—" Yes, I led the negotiations, but acquisitions that size are never one person's work. "Why didn't you tell us?" My mother's question came out as half accusation, half plea. I met her gaze steadily. "I did tell you, Mom, many times. You never believed me." "That's not—" she began, then stopped. "I mean, you mentioned starting some kind of financial consulting business, but you never said it was this successful." "Actually, I did. Remember when I tried to help with your retirement planning? I told you I could manage your investments because I was managing billions for clients. You laughed and said you'd stick with Dad's cousin at Edward Jones because he had real experience." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We thought you were exaggerating." "Why would I do that?" No one had a good answer. "I think," my Aunt Joan ventured, "we all had a certain image of Olivia in our minds. It can be hard to adjust when someone doesn't fit the role we've assigned them." "That's an understatement," Emma muttered beside me. Alexander cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, Avalon Partners has an excellent reputation in the financial world. The Meridian acquisition was considered a masterstroke. Acquiring that technological infrastructure at that valuation was, well, it was brilliant." I nodded my thanks, oddly touched by this professional validation from my brother-in-law. "So all this time," Vanessa said, her voice tight, "when you were letting us believe you were barely getting by, you were actually, what, a millionaire?" "I never said I was barely getting by. That was your assumption." "But you didn't correct us. You drove that crappy car. You wore Target clothes to family events. You complained about your rent." "I never complained about rent," I interrupted. "You complained about my apartment whenever you visited, which was exactly twice. I simply didn't engage." "This feels like a massive deception," she insisted. "And what would you call telling Alexander's mother I was the family charity case?" I countered. "Or that I'd embarrass you in front of his colleagues?" She had the grace to look ashamed. I shouldn't have said those things." "No, you shouldn't have. But they revealed what you really thought of me, which was apparently so fixed that the possibility of me being successful never even occurred to you." My mother made a distressed sound. "We never thought you weren't smart, Olivia. We just worried about you. Starting a business is so risky, and you were always so idealistic." "Idealistic," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because I remember being called impractical, naive, a dreamer with my head in the clouds." "We were trying to protect you from disappointment," my father said. "No, you were projecting your own fears onto me, and when I succeeded anyway, it was easier to ignore the evidence than to reconsider your perception." The room fell silent again. I think, Grandma Rose spoke up from her armchair in the corner, what Olivia is saying is that she needed support, not protection, and certainly not dismissal. Several heads nodded reluctantly. So what now? My mother asked, echoing my earlier question to Grandma. Where do we go from here? I looked around at the faces of my family, confused, hurt, some defensive, others genuinely contrite. Despite everything, these were the people who had shaped me, for better or worse. That depends, I said carefully. I'm not interested in maintaining pretenses anymore. If we're going to have a relationship, it needs to be based on who I actually am, not who you're comfortable with me being. Of course we want to know the real you, my father insisted. Do you? Because the real me is the CEO of a successful company. The real me makes decisions that affect thousands of people's livelihoods. The real me sits on the boards of 3 major corporations and advises on economic policy. I held his gaze. The real me has never needed your financial help or career advice, but could have used your emotional support and belief. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I don't know if I can do this, Vanessa suddenly said, her voice breaking. How am I supposed to just adjust to this new reality? To find out my sister has been essentially a stranger all these years? I'm the same person I've always been, I told her. The only difference is now you know what I do for a living. But it changes everything, she insisted. All this time, you let me believe I was more successful than you, that I had figured things out while you were still struggling. You let me feel sorry for you. And that was important to you, wasn't it? I asked quietly. Feeling superior? Her face flushed. That's not fair. Isn't it? You called me the family charity case at your wedding, Vanessa, to people you were trying to impress. Alexander looked mortified. She didn't mean... I think she did. I cut him off. And that's the problem. My perceived failure was a cornerstone of her self-image. That's enough, my father interjected. This isn't helping anything. Actually, I think it's exactly what needs to happen. Emma spoke up. We've all been complicit in this dynamic. If we want to move forward, we need to acknowledge it. My Aunt Patricia sighed heavily. She's right. We've done Olivia a disservice. I know I certainly have. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I just don't understand why you kept up the charade for so long, my mother said. Years, Olivia, years of deception. It wasn't about deceiving you. I tried to explain. It was about self-preservation. Every time I shared a success, it was diminished or dismissed. Eventually, it became easier to compartmentalize, to have my work life where I was valued for my abilities, and my family life where I was, well, whatever you needed me to be. We never asked you to be anything other than yourself, my father protested. Not explicitly, no, but families have powerful ways of enforcing their expectations. An uncomfortable silence fell as people absorbed this. I think, my Uncle William finally said, we owe Olivia an apology, a collective one, from all of us. Agreed, said Grandma Rose firmly. One by one, my relatives began to nod. I'm sorry, my cousin Jack said, surprising me with his sincerity. I've been condescending to you, and that was wrong. I'm sorry too, added my Aunt Joan. I should have asked more questions, paid more attention. As apologies continued around the room, I felt a tightness in my chest begin to ease. It wasn't perfect, and some, like Vanessa, remained stiff and uncomfortable, but it was a start. My parents approached me last, both looking years older than they had at dinner. We failed you, my father said simply. As parents, our job was to see you clearly and support your growth. Instead, we tried to fit you into a box of our own making. We were wrong, my mother added, tears in her eyes, and I am so sorry. I stood and embraced them both, my own eyes wet. I'm sorry too. I should have been braver, more persistent in showing you who I really am. No, my father said firmly, this isn't on you. We should have created a safe space for you to be yourself. As we separated, I noticed Vanessa standing awkwardly nearby, Alexander at her side. I need to apologize as well, she said stiffly. What I said at the wedding was cruel. I was jealous. I think. Jealous? I echoed in disbelief. Of what? You thought I was struggling. Not of your circumstances, of the way you've always been so self-contained. You never seemed to need anyone's approval. She laughed humorlessly. Turns out you actually didn't. It was such an unexpected insight that I didn't know how to respond. Anyway, she continued when I remained silent, I'm sorry for the wedding comments and for a lot of things over the years. Thank you, I said simply. An awkward silence descended. So, Alexander broke it with forced cheer. I don't suppose Avalon Partners is looking for new legal representation. The tension broke as everyone laughed. We're actually quite happy with our current firm, I told him, but I'd be open to recommendations for our portfolio companies. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. I'd love to discuss that sometime. The conversation gradually shifted to more normal topics, though there was an undercurrent of uncertainty as everyone adjusted to this new reality. People began to ask me genuine questions about my work, showing interest rather than dismissal. I answered openly, no longer filtering or downplaying my role. It was strange and liberating at the same time. Later, as the gathering began to disperse for the night, Emma linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the guest cabins. I'm proud of you, she said. That took courage. I'm not sure courage had much to do with it. It just happened. Maybe, but you've been hiding your light for years. That stops now, right? I nodded. It stops now? Good. She squeezed my arm. Because I want to hear all about this Westlake deal that's been in the news. I stopped walking. How do you know about Westlake? She grinned. I read the financial press. Unlike the rest of our family, the rumors started weeks ago. Her expression grew more serious. I suspected for a while, that there was more to your career than you let on. The way you talked about financial markets was too knowledgeable, too insightful, but I figured you had your reasons for keeping it quiet. You could have called me on it and spoil your strategic plan. I may not be a financial genius, but I know better than to interfere with a Bennett woman on a mission, she winked. Besides, the look on Vanessa's face tonight was worth the wait. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. It really was, wasn't it? Absolutely priceless, she yawned. Anyway, I expect a full tour of this penthouse I've been hearing about, and maybe a job. I'm pretty good with numbers myself. I'll keep that in mind. We reached her cabin first. Before going inside, she turned and hugged me tightly. The truth suits you, Olivia. Don't hide it again. After she disappeared inside, I continued to my own cabin, mulling over the events of the evening. Nothing had been resolved completely. There were too many years of misunderstanding for that. But a door had been opened. What happened next would depend on everyone's willingness to walk through it, including mine. As I got ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Westlake's legal team agreed to our terms. Announcement Monday? Also, how's the family drama? I smiled and typed back. Monday works, and the family drama is evolving. I'll fill you in when I'm back. Setting my phone aside, I walked to the window and looked out at the moonlight reflecting off the lake. For the first time in years, I felt whole, not split between my professional success and familial diminishment, but fully integrated. It wouldn't be easy. Old patterns rarely changed without resistance, but it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. The months following the family reunion brought changes I couldn't have anticipated. Some were predictable. The initial awkwardness as my family adjusted to the reality of my success, the tentative questions about my work, the occasional backsliding into old patterns of interaction. My mother still sometimes slipped and asked if I was doing okay financially, then caught herself with an embarrassed laugh. Other changes were more surprising. My father, who had always been somewhat distant, began calling me regularly to discuss business ideas. He'd owned an auto repair shop before retiring, and it turned out He had a keen entrepreneurial mind that had never been fully expressed. Now he was full of questions about market analysis and expansion strategies, less for himself than out of genuine curiosity. "I should have recognized it in you," he said during one of our calls. "That drive, I had it too. Just never had the opportunities you created for yourself." My relationship with Vanessa remained complicated. There were moments of genuine connection, like when she called to ask my advice on negotiating contracts for her interior design business, and there were setbacks, like when she made a pointed comment at Thanksgiving about how some people were too busy with their important jobs to help with dinner preparations. But we were trying, which was more than I could have said a year ago. The most unexpected development, however, came from an entirely different quarter. 3 weeks after the reunion, I received a call from Thomas Westlake himself, the aging founder of Westlake Industries, the company Avalon had been negotiating to acquire. "Ms. Bennett?" His gravelly voice came through the speakerphone in my office. "I've been thinking about our conversation last month." "Mr. Westlake," I replied, signaling my assistant to close my office door. "I'm glad to hear from you. I trust you received the revised offer?" I did. Very generous, but that's not why I'm calling. I waited, curious. Thomas Westlake was a legend in the industry, a self-made billionaire who had built his technology company from nothing in the early days of the internet. At 78, he was finally looking to step back, which had opened the door for our acquisition talks. "I've been reading about you," he continued. "Impressive track record. Even more impressive when one considers the obstacles you've likely faced as a woman in this field." "Thank you. But that's not what interests me most." He paused. "I understand you built Avalon entirely on your own. No family money, no powerful connections, just intelligence and grit." "That's correct." "That's rare these days. Most of the young hotshots I meet come from privilege. Nothing wrong with that, mind you, but they haven't been tested the way you have." I wasn't sure where he was going with this. "Mr. Westlake, about the offer." "I'm declining it," he interrupted. My heart sank. We'd spent months on this deal, and it was potentially transformative for both companies. "May I ask why? If it's the valuation, we have some flexibility." "It's not the money." Another pause. "I've decided not to sell Westlake Industries, not to Avalon, not to anyone." I sat back in my chair, processing this unexpected development. "I see. But I do have a different proposition for you, one I think you'll find interesting." By the time I hung up 40 minutes later, my head was spinning. Thomas Westlake wasn't looking to sell his company. He was looking for a successor, and for reasons I was still trying to comprehend, he had decided I might be the right person. "I don't want Westlake Industries carved up for parts," he had explained. "I want it to continue growing, innovating. What I need is someone with vision who can take it into the next era. Someone who understands both the financial and human elements of building something meaningful." His proposal: I would join Westlake as president and COO, working alongside him for 2 years. If all went well, I would transition to CEO while he moved to chairman of the board. Eventually, I would have the opportunity to acquire his controlling interest in the company. It was an incredible opportunity. Westlake was 10 times the size of Avalon, with global operations and cutting-edge technology, but it would mean stepping away from the company I had built from nothing. "Take some time to think about it," he'd said. "This isn't a decision to make hastily." I spent the next week in a state of productive turmoil, examining the opportunity from every angle. I consulted with James and my other top executives at Avalon. I ran the numbers, researched Westlake's market position, and considered the personal implications. In the midst of this professional decision-making, I did something I'd never done before. I called my parents to discuss it. Wow, that's quite an opportunity," my father said after I'd explained the situation. I could hear the pride in his voice, no longer muted or confused. "It is, but I'm torn about leaving Avalon." "Understandable. You built it from the ground up." "Exactly, it feels like abandoning my child." My mother's voice joined in on the speakerphone. Or maybe it's more like watching your child graduate. You've built something strong enough to continue without your daily presence. It was such an insightful comment, and so unlike the mother who had dismissed my business acumen for years, that I was momentarily speechless. "Mom's right," my father added. "If you've got good people in place, maybe this is the natural evolution. You built Avalon to prove you could. What would you build Westlake into?" We talked for over an hour, a real conversation where they listened to my concerns, asked thoughtful questions, and offered perspectives without trying to direct my decision. It was the kind of parental support I had craved for years without realizing it. The next day, I called Thomas Westlake and accepted his offer. The transition wasn't simple. There were legal complexities, leadership changes at Avalon to implement, and the challenge of stepping into a massive organization as an outsider. But 6 months in, I knew I'd made the right choice. Westlake Industries was a sleeping giant with enormous potential, and waking it up was the most exhilarating professional challenge I'd ever faced. It also required me to be more public than I'd ever been before. As the incoming leader of a major technology company, I couldn't maintain the low profile I'd cultivated at Avalon. There were interviews, conference keynotes, and industry events where I was now a recognized figure. Which is how, indirectly, I ended up on the cover of Business Innovators magazine. The photo shoot took place in Westlake's Seattle headquarters, a sleek glass tower overlooking Puget Sound. The interviewer was thorough, asking about my background, my vision for Westlake, and the challenges of transitioning from private equity to technology leadership. "There's surprisingly little public information about your early career," she noted toward the end of our conversation. "Most executives of your stature have a well-documented rise." I smiled. I've always been more focused on the work than the publicity. Still, it's unusual. Did you make a conscious decision to keep a low profile? The question gave me pause. In the past, I would have deflected, given a non-answer that preserved the compartmentalization between my professional and personal lives. But things had changed. "Actually, there's a story there," I said. "For years, my own family didn't know what I really did for a living." Her eyes widened with journalistic interest. "They didn't know you were running Avalon Partners?" "No. They thought I was a mid-level bank employee struggling to make ends meet." "But why?" I considered how to answer. "It's complicated. In the beginning, they didn't believe me when I talked about my ambitions. After a while, it became easier to let them think what they wanted. It created a strange situation where I was living two completely separate lives." "That must have been difficult." "It was," I acknowledged, "but also instructive. There's nothing quite like having your closest relations underestimate you to fuel your determination to succeed." The story made it into the article, just a few paragraphs in a comprehensive profile focused primarily on my business acumen and plans for Westlake. I didn't think much of it until the magazine hit newsstands and my phone began buzzing with notifications. The narrative had struck a chord. Other successful women began sharing similar stories of being underestimated by family, friends, or colleagues. #hidden success started trending on social media, with people recounting how they'd achieved goals others had dismissed as impossible. Vanessa called the day the magazine was released. "So I'm at the salon," she said without preamble, "and your face is staring at me from the coffee table." I laughed. Not exactly how I'd choose to join you at the salon, but better than nothing. I read the article. Her tone was difficult to interpret. "You talked about us, about how we didn't know what you really did." I mentioned it briefly. Yes, I didn't name names or share private details. Still, a pause. "It's weird, seeing our family dynamic discussed in a national magazine." "I understand that. It wasn't meant to embarrass anyone." Another pause, longer this time. "Is that how you really felt? That we didn't believe in you?" "Yes," I said simply. She was quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I really am. Olivia, I don't think I understood until reading it how much that must have hurt." It was such an unexpected moment of genuine contrition that I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. That means a lot. Do you think, she hesitated, do you think we could have lunch next time you're in Philadelphia? Just the two of us? I'd like that. After we hung up, I sat at my desk looking out at the Seattle skyline, reflecting on how much had changed in a year. The walls I'd built between my professional success and personal relationships had come down. The pretenses had been dropped. And while the transition hadn't been entirely smooth, what was emerging felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced with my family before. That evening, I had dinner with Thomas Westlake at his waterfront home. As we sat on his terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, he asked how I was settling into my new role. It's challenging, I admitted, but in all the right ways. He nodded, satisfied. I knew you were the right choice. You know why? My track record at Avalon? Partly, but more importantly, I recognized something in you that reminded me of myself at your age, that hunger to prove yourself. He sipped his scotch. I read that article today about how your family didn't know what you'd accomplished. I shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't meant to be the focus. No, it was illuminating. Helps me understand you better. He set down his glass. My father was the same way. Couldn't see past his own limited vision of who I was supposed to be. Died still thinking I'd made a mistake not taking over his hardware store. I'm sorry. He waved away my sympathy. Ancient history, but it shaped me, just as your experience shaped you, made us both more self-reliant, more determined. The difference is, you've had the courage to reconcile with your family while there's still time. That's something I never managed. His words stayed with me long after dinner ended. On the drive back to my apartment, I called my parents, not to discuss business or because obligation dictated it, but simply because I wanted to hear their voices, to nurture this new, more honest relationship we were building. We saw the magazine, my mother said after we'd exchanged greetings. You looked beautiful, so professional. Thanks, Mom. Your father's been showing it to everyone who comes into the coffee shop. Practically has it memorized. I laughed, imagining my retired father proudly displaying the magazine to his friends. Tell him not to believe everything he reads. Journalists tend to exaggerate. Oh, he knows, but he's proud. We both are. She paused. We always were, you know, even when we didn't understand what you were doing, we just didn't know how to show it. I know, Mom. I understand better now. And I did. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be reframed. The girl who had felt unseen and underestimated had become a woman who recognized that family dynamics were complex and multifaceted, that sometimes people's limitations in understanding others stemmed from their own insecurities and experiences. That knowledge didn't erase the hurt of those years, but it did help me move forward with greater compassion, for my family and for myself. As I pulled into the parking garage of my building, I realized something with startling clarity. I was no longer hiding any part of myself. Not from my family, not from the world, and most importantly, not from me. The revelation brought a sense of peace I hadn't even known I was missing. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at Westlake, with my family, in my personal life, I would face them as my complete, integrated self. It had taken a wedding confrontation, a family reunion revelation, and a career transformation to get here. But sitting in my car, looking at the magazine on the passenger seat with my face on the cover, I knew it had been worth it. The hidden CEO was hidden no more. And that, finally, felt like success.